What is up, summoners? Welcome to the channel today for another closer look review video on my newest 4-star character that I've added to my roster in Cable. And Cable's a character that I really have been looking forward to getting my hands on for a while now. I remember when he first came out, there was a lot of hype surrounding him. Visually, he looks really cool. Had a couple interesting mechanics that we hadn't really seen in the game before. And I've played against him quite a bit on defense, but I've only got him as a 3-star. I have him as an Awakened 3-star, but I've never ranked him up and actually played with him. So very much was looking forward to getting him. Finally pulled him yesterday. I've really done nothing but test him since I pulled him. I took him immediately up to rank 4, which I apologize. Typically I've got video footage of that I play with music, but I forgot to record that yesterday. It's been a while since I've done one of these, so I guess I'm a little rusty, I guess you could say. But yeah, Cable for me is kind of a mixed bag. I'm not really sure what to think about him, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. We'll jump over into the ability list. We'll talk through all that, and we'll show some gameplay at the end, and then kind of wrap up my final thoughts on him. So let's jump over into the ability list. So I remember when Cable was announced and finally came to the game, there was a lot of excitement that was kind of surrounding him. A lot of people were really interested to get him. He looked like he was going to be just this beast, this machine. I mean, just looking at him, you can't deny the fact that he looks really cool. He was one of the first characters, I believe, that had a gun-based, ranged-based weapon that he was actually using as part of his normal rotation. So he looked really cool. I think people had expectations that would translate into somebody that hits really hard. And I find it interesting, like if you even look at the attributes right there in the middle, the champion tags, I know those don't really count for anything, but they try to tag them with kind of an overall feeling of the character's gameplay. And right there, it says offensive burst. But unfortunately, people who grind, at the time, it was like a really big number, or who went for him as a 5-star character, I think that they were quickly, I don't want to say disappointed per se, but I don't think he was exactly the character that we expected him to be. He definitely was not the burst character that everybody thought he was going to be. Even if you look at some of the other characters in his own mutant class, like if you look at Nightcrawler, X-23, even Archangel now, Iceman, even Beast when you've got him in the right combo form. I mean, all of those mutant characters in his own class outpace him on the offensive side, which is really unfortunate. But that's not to say that we didn't just misjudge him, and maybe there's a different way we should be playing him. So let's take a closer look at his abilities. We'll walk through those, and we'll try to figure out the best way to use Cable and where we should be using him at in the game. And I'm going to use my 3-star character only because he is Awakened, unlike my 4-star character. So we'll be able to actually look at his ability list. Now, yeah, if you look at the passives, I'm going to skip over the signature ability real quick and jump into the passive. 50% chance to regen for 10 seconds every time you gain a bar of power. So every time you push into an S1, an S2, or an S3, there's a flat 15% chance that you're going to regen. Unfortunately, once you fall below 25% health, that chance falls off, which it's a little head scratching. Like when you're below 25% health, like that's when you really need a regen to kick in. But yeah, you actually lose the chance to get it all together. On top of that, 15% is just not that great. That's basically a little better than 1 in 10 chances every time you go into a bar of power to be able to get this regen, which typically, if you're going to be using him in AQ or questing, obviously arena, those fights are really not that long for you to go into that many bars of power to really have a good chance of getting a regen every fight. This regen, unless you're just super lucky, is probably something, if you've got him in AQ or you're questing with him, you're probably going to see this thing proc, you know, maybe once every other fight would be good. Probably 1 in 3 fights-ish is probably when you're going to see this proc, depending upon how long the fights are. You know, it's good to cover a little bit of chip damage here and there, but it's just not reliable enough that you can really count on it if you're trying to go up against like a degeneration node or somebody like a Magic with Limbo. It's just not going to be able to outpace that damage just because it doesn't trigger enough. The other ability that is linked each time you go into a bar of power is his signature ability, the Techno-Organic Virus Suppression. Works the same way as the regen. Every time you gain a bar of power, there's a flat percentage chance that you are going to gain a buff, the power gain buff. You're going to gain 16.5% power over 10 seconds. And you can see there, only at level 1, that's already at a 20% chance. So as you dupe him or put signature stones into him, that percentage chance is actually going to grow to a fairly higher chance than the regen. You'll notice if you ever fight him in Alliance Wars, it seems like he almost always has that power gain buff up, which I think that combined with a few other things push him more into the realm of being a decent defender, I think, than people really thought he was going to be. But that is his first passive ability and his awakened ability. We'll talk more about the signature ability once I get into the specials. The other passive ability he has here, I'll just touch on. It really doesn't make that big of a difference, but each time that you gain a poison effect, Cable will lower the duration of it by 20% until you eventually, the duration is all the way down to 0. And once that happens, you actually gain 50% bonus to your special attack damage, which that is an amazing amount. However, you don't want to be going in and facing poison characters with Cable. That it just doesn't make any sense. As I mentioned before, his regen is not going to proc that often. If you think you're going to go in there against, I don't know, let's say you're in a quest against Abomination, and you think that you're going to be able to outpace the poison or get a lot of that back with the regen, you're probably going to be sorely mistaken, because that regen is probably not going to proc for you, and the poison's not. If it doesn't kill you, it's going to do a lot of damage before you ever get the chance to have that increase to your special attack power. So again, that's why it kind of triggers me more towards the fact that this is probably more defensive-based ability. So yeah, if you have somebody that is poison, don't use Cable. Just use Ultron, use Vision, use Dormammu, somebody who's poison immune. There are much better options. The other part of this, though, that is significant is the third little third part there, where it says when caused to bleed. So when you get a bleed effect on you, you will trigger a degeneration on the opponent. Again, this is really nice to have. If you do manage to get hit, you never want to get hit, but if you do manage to get hit by a character who's going to cause a bleed, there's that little bit of extra damage that'll pop in for you. Also, again, this is a very defensive-based ability. The other thing you take into consideration is if you have a defender that is running suicides and they have bleed on them to start the fight, you are going to have a degeneration on you right away as well. So a lot of these things that I mentioned before are all kind of pointing towards a defensive character. His heavy attacks, his heavy attack is actually really cool. You're going to cause, there's a 100% chance to cause a degeneration. It does not work, you can see there, does not work against robotic characters, which there's a lot of abilities in the game that don't work against robotic characters, but we just don't have that many robotic characters in the game. You're talking Ultron, Vision. I always forget one. I'm sure I'm forgetting one in there, but either way, you don't necessarily want to be taking Cable up against those characters just because they've got class disadvantage against you anyway. But for everybody else, the heavy attack is actually pretty useful. The second part there, it says the strength of the degen scales inverse of your opponent's current power, which that can be a little confusing. The more power that the enemy has, the less the degeneration is going to tick for. So you really want to be using your heavy attack. I mean, always try to keep it up. It's always good to have some form of degeneration going, but you really want to try to be timing that after you bait out a special. If you can parry stun them when they have no power, that's when you want to be using it, because it will do its most damage. If you look here at the video clip that I'm going to be playing, the degeneration that is going on him at 154 per tick, I applied that when he had no power, and what you'll notice here, I think I get him to 1 bar of power. Yep. So he's got 1 bar of power, and you notice it dropped all the way off from 154 all the way down to 93. So that is the inverse relationship that it's talking about there. The higher the power level go that the enemy has, the lower the degeneration is going to be as it's ticking away. So that's something that's very important to keep in mind as far as timing goes. The degeneration is kind of an interesting aspect. I don't really think there's anybody else that's got something like this that they place. I don't think anybody else has a degen that they place that I can think of. I'm sure somebody will correct me, but it's definitely something that helps to compensate the low overall damage that Cable puts out. So having the heavy attack up and the degen on the character as much as possible will actually help you out quite a bit. Special attacks now, 1, 2, and 3 are all pretty straightforward. Special attack 1 in and of itself is just straight damage. It actually does not cause any debuffs. You do not gain any buffs from it. The only thing special about it, if you jump down to the S3, when you use the S3, you gain a True Strike ability for 17 seconds. This True Strike ability allows you to ignore enemy armor, enemy resistance, and also all passive evade effects. So Nightcrawler, Spider-Man, they cannot evade you while this True Strike is up, which 17 seconds is actually a pretty good clip. But the other thing that happens is if you have True Strike up and you use your S1, it still doesn't cause any sort of debuffs, doesn't gain anything for you, but it is unblockable, which it's very similar to kind of the poison effect that he gains. It's kind of nice to have, but it's just not something that you're really ever going to be attempting to use necessarily. There are a lot other better characters to attempt to use on unblockable nodes. So if the timing works out, if you happen to use an S3 and you're on an unblockable node, I guess you can use it, but this is not really something that you want to be pushing yourself to add into your normal rotation. The S1, whether it's unblockable or not, it does not hit very hard at all, and I really would not suggest using it. Cable is very much an S2, a special attack 2 character, and when he is awakened, and I'll tie the awakened ability here into the S2, I think when he is awakened, he is a much, much better character than when he is unawakened. And the reason, as I mentioned, is all tied into this S2. If you read it, it does an incineration effect, which is nice. It lowers the perfect block chance. It lowers block proficiency by 50%, while the incinerate is active for 10 seconds there, which again is nice. You'll be able to do a little bit of extra power during those 10 seconds. But the big thing here that I want you to focus on is the S2 has a 90% chance to give the opponent a concussion. So pretty much every time you use the S2, you're going to get a concussion on the enemy. This reduces their ability accuracy by 90% for 11 seconds. The potency of this effect is affected by class relationships. So all that means is if you're going up against class disadvantage, so if you're going up against somebody who's a tech, they're going to be lowering that percentage. Probably, I would guess, it's probably the same as Black Widow when she goes up against a mutant. It lowers by 15%. So I don't see it here, but I would expect that to lower down probably by 15% to about 75. But one way or the other, that is still a very, very high chance for 11 seconds. Now, in and of itself, that's nice, but as I mentioned before, the signature ability, you're gaining power from your signature ability. There's a chance to gain that power buff every time that you gain a bar of power, and the higher your signature level is, the more often that thing is going to be up. So essentially, I think the best way that you can play Cable, and I think the way that he's intended to be played, is once he is awakened, you really need to be focusing on having your S2 up on the enemy for as long as possible. The S2, that concussion, will allow you to bypass evades. You don't even have to worry about the S3. At a 90% chance, you don't have to worry about evades from Nightcrawler, from Spider-Man, even from characters right now from the Web Slinger event, from the Symbiotic Spider-Man. I've got a video clip of that playing right now. But when Symbiote Spider-Man, when he's awakened, when he uses a special, he gains that passive, or he gains the evade buff. However, with that concussion ability on there, there's a 90% chance that that is not going to trigger. So characters, again, like Symbiote, who are going to be gaining evade effects, you can bypass that all with a concussion. And 11 seconds is a long enough time, especially if you've got your signature ability proccing the additional power gain. You're going to be having an S2 that's available to you a very large percentage of the fight. And I don't know why they listed him as a offensive burst character, unless they are considering that you spamming the S2 like this, having the incinerate up, lowering the block percentage, or the perfect block and block proficiency. That is when you really need to be doing all of your damage. From that aspect, I guess that's correct. But really, one way or the other, I think Cable is actually a much more well-rounded champ, I guess is what I could say. The ability to lower ability accuracy by such a high percentage is something that is really, really nice. Even if you go back to, let's just take Abomination for an example, and again, you really don't want to be running him in there, but let's just say, for example, you're in an alliance war, and you happen to run up against an Abomination. You know, he's got that little bit of poison reduction in his back pocket. If you can get to the S2 and lower the chance that you're going to be triggering the poison altogether, that will help you get through that a lot as well. Even having the degen on the character just allows you to do kind of passive damage while you're baiting out things and trying to work around taking damage yourself. You know, the regen, as I mentioned, is not great, but again, it all kind of plays into this well-rounded champ that I think Cable was more intended to be. Is he necessarily the champion that I wanted him to be? No. Even running him in with a full mutant team, he just does not do that much damage as a 440 character. Again, I've got him at rank 4. At rank 5, it may be a totally different situation, but at rank 4, rank 440, he just does not hit that hard. If I had a spot that I could put him in, again, I think that he's probably best suited on defense. I know that may sound a little bit strange, but especially if you are somebody who likes to run suicides and you don't want to turn them off, then I think Cable is actually a very strong champion for you to use on defense. I think he's better served there than the minimal amount of offense that he can bring to the offensive side. So if you're running suicides, that means you've got the bleed effect up. You're going to be causing degens right away on the enemy. The power gain is a huge annoyance because you're constantly trying to bait out specials. That power gain also does help him a little bit. If you're in lower tiers, he's actually a decent character to put on unblockable S1s. Not everybody knows how to evade that properly. You can evade it fully, but in the lower tiers especially, I think that probably is going to give people a lot of issues. Not that it necessarily hits all of that hard, but again, the power gain is going to be getting him to that S1 constantly. So with the degen from the bleed on you if you have suicides, plus the unblockable S1, I think all that combined, I think does make him a decent defender. Now, if you're newer to the game and you don't have a giant roster of characters, but you have recently pulled maybe a Cable from a 4-star, don't worry. he is still a solid champ to use. Even unawakened, he can still find his spots here and there. One of the things, though, I would highly recommend to you is if you are going to feature him, let's say you're trying to get through story quest, maybe 3 or 4, or you're trying to attempt maybe master mode of the current event, try your very best, if you're going to use him a lot, to build the synergies around critical rating and critical damage. So the critical rating we see right here, and the critical damage rating right there. So crit rate, crit damage. Both of those numbers for Cable, the base numbers, are very, very low. 15% critical rate, 148% critical damage. Those numbers are almost half of what other characters like Rogue, X-23, even Psylocke are all sporting numbers that are way in excess of what Cable's base attributes are. So to compensate a little bit for that, if you can do your best to build up characters that are going to increase critical rate is probably a little more important. But if you can do both of those at the same time, crit rate and crit damage, that's kind of best of both worlds. Thankfully, he is a mutant, so you can take advantage of all of the really good mutant synergies that you have here. However, if you're wanting maybe to put together a team that's actually going to be maybe a little more viable, have a little more used to it, maybe somebody like Superior Iron Man, who gets crit damage rating from Captain America, then Captain America in turn gets it from Iron Man. So in this particular setting, you know, you've got 2 characters in Superior Iron Man and Iron Man who've got decent regen. Captain America, good utility there. Even somebody like Wolverine you can throw in for synergy with Captain America. Those will all help to build a good overall team if you're going to be questing, but will also help to kind of push Cable, his deficiencies up and his crit rate and his crit damage to help him there. Finally, as I finish this off, I will let, this is the fight against the final line in the Web Slinger challenge, whatever you want to call it. It's Path F, the final one before Vulture. So you can see that he does have a little bit of usefulness. And it's funny, I've been dogging the regen, and there it is. As soon as I get it, my first S1, it pops in. I really wish that I did have my Cable awakened. I think he probably benefits greatly from being awakened. A lot of his overall usefulness is tied into his S2, and being able to have an S2 at the ready, constantly throughout the fight. Like for instance, if I had him awaken, I probably would have a power gain going right now, helping me get back to that S2. And if I didn't, I just went into an S1, so there's probably going to be one trigger there. So you can see there's a big difference as far as not necessarily gameplay, but overall effectiveness when you've got your Cable awakened. The other thing that I'm trying to do here, which is a little more difficult when you're going against somebody that evades so much, is try your very, very best to get that degen up. Don't focus so much on trying to get the degen on there when the enemy has, 0 power, so you can get that degen amount as high as possible. Just focus more so on just keeping it up. Having it up, even though it may be ticking for a lesser amount, is still a lot better than not having it up at all. You can see I've got actually my second regen there, which I think out of all of my testing, I think that was the most that was the most I got from anybody. But yeah, this fight was actually fairly fun, and I hope kind of sheds a little bit of light on maybe how you should be using Cable, and he does in fact have a place in the game. Maybe not so much towards end game. There are other characters who probably do things that he does better than him. For instance, if you need a regen champ, you've got Wolverine, but he's got a little bit of that tied in. If you need a, let's say you need somebody who lowers defensive abilities, you've got Crossbones, who's a lot better than that, but he's got a little bit of that tied in as well. He's got, his Incinerate, he's got his degen. So there's a lot that's all tied into him that I think overall makes him a decent character. Is he anybody that's going to set the world on fire? No. Is he like a god tier? No. But definitely a lot of fun to play, which this is a game, so I guess ultimately that's what counts more than anything. Alright guys, I hope that this video has helped you get a better understanding of Cable, how you should be using him, where you should be using him. If you certainly have any questions, you're welcome to ask those down below in the comments. Follow me over on Twitter. The link to that will be in the description as well. Until I see you all in the next video, have a great day.